This video is sponsored by Surfshark. More on them later. It's a busy March evening in Southern California, and Burbank Airport is dealing with the evening rush of airline traffic coming in to land, a very typical situation for the Los Angeles airspace. A Southwest Airlines Boeing 737, inbound from Las Vegas, has just touched down on runway 8, but it is going way too fast compared to the previous arrivals. It has already passed the halfway point on the runway, and the perimeter fence on the other end is closing in. The flight crew is using everything they have in order to slow down the aircraft before it's too late. A runway excursion at this airport means running into a dense industrial neighborhood filled with warehouses, commercial trucks, and gas stations. Can the pilot slow down in time before an ordinary landing turns into a fiery catastrophe? This is the story of Southwest Airlines Flight 1455. It's the 5th of March, 2000. A Boeing 737, operated by Southwest Airlines, has just landed in Las Vegas McCarran International Airport and is parking at the gate. The aircraft is already 2 hours behind schedule due to the strong winds and rain conditions that were present in Las Vegas earlier in the day. As a result, this will be a quick turnaround for the aircraft. It will head back out west, this time as Flight 1455 to Burbank Glendale Pasadena Airport. This airport is located in the northern part of the Los Angeles metropolitan area and is now known as Hollywood Burbank Airport. Shortly before boarding begins, the flight crew of Flight 1455 arrives at the gate. Both pilots are just starting their scheduled 3-day trip, and this will be the first out of 5 total flights that were planned for them. The captain, 52-year-old Howard Peterson, is a U.S. Air Force veteran with a total of 11,000 hours of flying time, of which close to 10,000 is in the Boeing 737 family aircraft. He has been working for Southwest Airlines for over 10 years and has accumulated over 5,000 hours as a captain. Joining him as a first officer is Jeffrey D. Irwin, 43 years old, with a total of 5,000 hours, of which 2,500 hours in the Boeing 737. Jeffrey is also an Air Force pilot who had spent 12 years in active duty, in addition to serving as an F-16 fighter pilot in the reserve. The aircraft operated by Peterson and Irwin is a 15-year-old Boeing 737-300. This airframe has been in service with Southwest Airlines since 1994. The 300 model is the mid-size version of the popular Boeing 737 Classic series. In the one-cabin class configuration at Southwest Airlines, it is capable of carrying up to 138 passengers. With Southwest Airlines' famous focus on efficiency and quick gate turns as part of the low-cost operation model, all passengers board the plane within 20 minutes. At 4:50 p.m., Flight 1455 is pushed back from the gate in Las Vegas for the 200 nautical mile hop to Burbank. With the backlog of delays from earlier in the day, they spend another 15 to 20 minutes taxiing to the runway and waiting for their turn before finally receiving a clearance to depart. The takeoff and climb are uneventful, and shortly thereafter, the aircraft levels off for its short journey. The flight is expected to only take 44 minutes from takeoff to landing, as it follows the path southwest from Las Vegas to coastal California over the Mojave Desert. After a quick cruise portion, the crew begins preparation for their arrival to Burbank. Approximately 15 minutes prior to landing, overflying Palmdale, California, the first officer tunes into the Burbank Airport ATIS radio frequency to receive the latest weather report. The ATIS, or the Automatic Terminal Information Service, is an automated system that continuously broadcasts looped messages regarding present weather conditions and other pertinent information at an airport. Unless more rapidly changing conditions exist, these reports are typically updated hourly at the top of the hour.
As the crew of Flight 1455 checks the latest weather report on Burbank, I've got time to introduce today's sponsor, Surfshark. With Surfshark VPN, you can protect your online privacy by encrypting all of your data, ensuring your personal information stays safe from hackers and big companies. Whether you're browsing at home or at a public Wi-Fi connection, Surfshark encrypts your internet traffic, keeping your data safe wherever you go. But Surfshark isn't just about protecting your data. It also allows you to change your virtual location, so you can access websites, streaming services, and even deals from anywhere in the world. Want to browse as if you're in a different country? No problem. With Surfshark, you can easily connect to a server in any of its 3,200 plus locations across 100 countries. For instance, I'm currently in the Netherlands, but with just a click, I can be in Las Vegas, exactly where Flight 1455 is going to land in a few minutes. Interested? Head over to surfshark.com/airinvestigation and grab 4 extra months of Surfshark for free. Don't miss out, protect your privacy, and start browsing the internet like never before.
It has been raining on and off throughout the entire day in Burbank, and as a result, the runway is slightly wet with notable pockets of moisture. However, no rainfall has been reported in the last hour, and the latest ATIS report from the airport indicates good visibility and overcast skies. The winds are from 260 degrees at 18 knots with gusts of up to 26 knots. Aircraft arriving at Burbank are currently sequenced to land on runways 33 and 26. Upon receiving the weather information, the captain tells the first officer to plan on using runway 33 for arrival and calls for the descent and approach checklists. For the next 8 minutes, the aircraft proceeds on its planned arrival track while the crew completes the required descent and approach checks and procedures. At 6:02, the Southern California Terminal Approach Controller informs the pilots that the ATIS report has been updated with new information. The winds at the surface have now subsided to only 6 knots, and the airport configuration has shifted to using runways 08 and 15 or arrivals. Given the updated weather, the controller instructs Southwest 1455 to plan for the ILS approach on runway 08 and directs the aircraft to fly a heading of 190 degrees. Despite runway 26 being the most favorable option for landing into the wind, an important factor that would improve landing performance and help the aircraft reduce its landing distance, it was not chosen by the flight crew of Flight 1455 due to the geographical positioning of the runways. Aside from being situated in a very busy airspace, Burbank Airport sits in a valley with rising terrain on nearly all sides, and for that reason, flying in and out of the airport creates additional challenges for pilots as they must avoid the nearby hills and mountains. To the west of runway 26 lie the Verdugo Mountains, with peaks close to 3,000 feet, which act as a significant obstacle for any landing aircraft. Furthermore, runway 8 is the only runway at Burbank Airport that avoids high terrain and has an ILS approach. Had the winds remained strong, the captain would have most likely used runway 33 and landed with a crosswind. However, as the more recent ATIS report showed a significant decrease in wind speed, runway 8 was the preferred choice for both the pilots and the controller. Along with Flight 1455, 2 other aircraft, another Southwest Airlines 737 and a Falcon 2000 business jet, are expected to be landing in Burbank at around the same time. All 3 aircraft are planning to land on runway 08. Hence, air traffic control will have to arrange the flights to follow the same final approach path one by one. The controller decides to sequence Flight 1455 between the other 2 arrivals. In order to squeeze Flight 1455 in, approach control instructs the crew to keep their speed at 230 knots or greater until advised further. Speed restrictions are not uncommon in busy airspace, and they help ATC to more seamlessly direct aircraft into position for landing, quite similar to how cars adjust their speed and try to match the flow of traffic when merging onto a busy highway. However, a restriction to maintain a high speed requires the flight crew to be extra cautious and plan further ahead, as going too fast reduces the time and the distance available to slow down an aircraft once it is cleared for an approach. Thus, additional planning and extra caution on the part of the flight crew are essential. At 6:05, 5 minutes prior to landing, approach control instructs Flight 1455 to descend to 5,000 feet and follow the other Southwest aircraft arriving at Burbank Airport. The controller also offers the crew an option of conducting a visual approach if they prefer to do so. After discussing this amongst each other, the crew agrees. On a visual approach, pilots use ground references and visually judge their height and distance from the runway, thus adjusting the gliding angle and the path accordingly. Different from an instrument landing system approach that requires a pilot to capture a radio signal from an airport transmitter and follow a predetermined glide slope, a visual approach significantly reduces the workload for pilots and controllers alike, as it is less restrictive. Visual approaches are not uncommon in good weather conditions when the flight crew can see the runway before beginning the approach. After informing the controller that they have the landing traffic in sight and are following it, the crew of Flight 1455 receives the clearance to begin a visual approach for runway 08. Along with the approach clearance, ATC instructs Flight 1455 to descend to 3,000 feet and maintain that altitude until past Van Nuys Airport. This is a small but busy general aviation airport which is located approximately 5 miles to the west of runway 08. It is a popular choice for business jets and small privately owned airplanes. Slightly concerned about other air traffic in that area, the captain decides to delay his descent out of 3,000 feet until they are past Van Nuys, adding more pressure to the situation. Although not specifically stated by the approach controller, the speed restriction no longer applies to the aircraft because an approach clearance has been issued. Per the Aeronautical Information Manual, if ATC determines, before an approach clearance is issued, that it is no longer necessary to apply speed adjustment procedures, they will inform the pilot to resume normal speed. Approach clearances supersede any prior speed adjustment assignments, and pilots are expected to make their own speed adjustments as necessary to complete the approach. Flight 1455, however, is not slowing down as it continues flying toward the runway. There was no additional discussion between the captain and the first officer regarding their speed. It seems that they are still trying to abide by the restriction, and no additional instruction to reduce the speed follows from air traffic control. At 6:08, still at 230 knots, the aircraft turns onto the final approach course for runway 08, approximately 9 miles from the airport. At this speed, it would take the crew only 2 minutes to get to the runway, barely enough time to configure the aircraft for the landing and to start the descent. In an attempt to reduce the speed as fast as possible, the captain instructs the first officer to extend the aircraft's speed brakes. Moving surfaces installed on the wing that can be mechanically raised to create more drag and assist in reducing aircraft speed. 1 minute later, at a speed of 220 knots in preparation for landing, the captain asks the first officer to extend the landing gear and gradually extend the flaps to 25 degrees. Too high for the approach and still going too fast, the aircraft begins the descent for the runway approximately 3 miles from the threshold. From this position, in order to reach the threshold of the runway without overflying it, the aircraft would have to follow a 7-degree slope at an average descent rate of 2,200 feet per minute. These values are more than double the standard 3-degree angle at 1,000 feet per minute that classifies a stabilized approach. Attempting to salvage the approach, the captain pushes the aircraft's nose down and begins a steep descent toward the runway.
Sink rate. Sink rate.
This maneuver triggers several warnings from the ground proximity warning system. a system that measures the rate at which the aircraft is approaching the ground and issues corresponding alerts to warn the flight crew of an impending collision with the terrain. A sink rate alert is played inside the flight deck, serving as a caution message to the flight crew to notify them that the aircraft is descending too fast and, if not recovered, will impact the ground.
Pull up. Pull up.
Seconds thereafter, the message changes to a more assertive pull up as a direct instruction for the crew to stop the descent and level off the aircraft before it impacts the ground. Although receiving a GPWS alert requires immediate execution of an escape maneuver in most instances, prompting an application of maximum power and the best rate of climb, an exemption in the Southwest Airlines Company manuals allows a flight crew to continue an approach even after receiving a GPWS warning. But this is only allowed under the condition that the flight is conducted in visual meteorological conditions. Additionally, the crew must ensure that there is no risk of collision with the ground.
Pull up.
Hearing another pull up warning, the captain states, "It's all right," to the first officer and continues the approach. He instructs the first officer to extend the flaps to 30 degrees and, a few moments later, to the full 40-degree position. As the first officer points to the airspeed indicator, the captain states, "It won't go, I know that. It's all right," referring to the flap limiter, a design feature of the 737 model. To avoid excessive loads on the flaps, the flap limiter restricts the movement of the flaps beyond the 30-degree position at airspeeds above 158 knots. As a result, even though the flap selector is in the fully extended position, the aircraft is not in the full landing configuration. However, the approach is continued and the decision is made to attempt a landing. On the ground, several airport employees notice an aircraft that is approaching the runway unusually fast. Indeed, as Flight 1455 reaches the threshold of runway 08, it is still traveling 50 knots over its target approach speed. At 170 feet over the runway, the captain begins to raise the nose of the aircraft to transition it into a flare. Although the speed starts to slowly decrease, the 737 continues to float over the runway for 9 more seconds. At 6:10, at an airspeed of 180 knots and with flaps still extended only to 30 degrees, the aircraft at last touches down on runway 08, some 2,000 feet from the runway threshold. The flight crew now has just under 4,000 feet of runway length available to slow down. A loud roar erupts across the airport as the engines are set to the maximum reverse setting, and once the speed drops to 158 knots, the flaps finally extend to 40 degrees. Too little too late, as they have little effect on the aircraft's ability to slow down on the runway. "My fault," the captain repeats out loud several times, watching the airport fence move toward him faster than he expected. Reaching the last 1,000 feet of the runway, the first officer joins the captain in applying maximum pressure to the brake pedals, but nothing works. As a last resort, the captain turns the nose wheel tiller all the way to the right, hoping that the aircraft starts turning toward the gates and stops on the ramp. Unable to turn off the runway, the aircraft only slightly veers to the right. It then slides off the runway, breaks through the airport fence, and hits a passing car, pinning its hood to the ground. The airliner finally comes to a stop, only several feet from a gas station. Had it been a few knots faster on the approach, the outcome would have been much more terrifying. Despite the sheer terror she has just experienced, the driver of the pinned vehicle and her 4-year-old child are uninjured. Inside the aircraft, shock and panic ensued. The force of the impact deployed an escape slide at the front of the aircraft, blocking the forward section emergency exits. The forward jump seat, occupied by 2 flight attendants, has collapsed. With no word from the flight crew just yet, it is hard to know if it is safe to evacuate the aircraft, and the flight attendants stand by before opening the doors. It appears that the worst possible outcome has been avoided, and there are no fatalities on board. Finally, the captain turns on the passenger announcement system and addresses the passengers.
Folks, please remain seated. We are all right.
Well, there goes my career.
What went wrong with Flight 1455, and what could have been done to avoid the accident? A review of all factors and accident data, completed by the National Transportation Safety Board, has determined the main probable cause of the accident to be the flight crew's actions that lead to a high-speed approach at a steep angle, and their decision to continue the approach even though the company-defined parameters for a stabilized approach were not met. Although most of the blame for this accident was attributed to the flight crew, the NTSB identified as a contributing factor the actions of the controller that placed the aircraft in such a manner as to leave no safe options for the flight crew other than a go-around maneuver. There is a silver lining to this story. As a result of this accident, runway 08 at Burbank Airport was eventually retrofitted with an engineered materials arresting system, a soft cushion-like material installed at the end of the runway that easily crumbles under an aircraft, slowing it down without causing significant damage. 18 years after the accident, the EMAS at Burbank Airport stopped another Southwest Airlines 737 that overran runway 08 on landing. But that is a story for another day. Thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring the video. Don't forget to click the link in the description to get an amazing discount.